Hi everyone, this is Phil Travis, and this announcement is for AMH 1020 here at SCF. This week, I'll try to make this announcement kind of brief. This week, we are going to be examining the Reagan administration, and we'll be looking at the Chapter 26 from the Phoner reading, just like we did last week. Last week we talked about Nixon in the 70s, and this week we're going to talk about Reagan and the rise of conservatism in the 1980s. And those sections are all come from the same part of that reading. So if you read really closely last week of the entirety, you've really kind of kept yourself ahead of the game for the reading for this week. If not, be sure you read the section on Reagan and the rise of conservatism from that reading in Phoner chapter 26. Read that very closely. I also have a presentation up, as usual, my weekly lecture for you guys. And actually this week it comes from really my area of personal specialization, which is U.S. foreign policy during the late Cold War. I wrote a book that was published recently called Reagan's War on Terrorism in Nicaragua. My personal specialization is with the Reagan administration's foreign policy in the developing world, particularly in Nicaragua and Central America during the 1980s. And so the presentation is more broad than just that. It deals with a number of different items, but it's broadly on the Reagan offensive. So Ronald Reagan, during the 1980s, the Reagan administration sought to sort of, cast off the sort of limitations of the old Cold War containment policy, and instead they promoted something called the Reagan offensive, which was built on the notion that in areas of vulnerability that the United States could use more aggressive types of actions to try to topple regimes that were of a leftist nature, of a nature oriented with the greater Soviet bloc. And of course, we see the Reagan offensive applied most earnestly in Nicaragua. Watch my presentation on this, on the Reagan administration. I also talk, of course, about landmark nuclear arms deals with Gorbachev and other aspects of the Reagan administration's foreign policy, the so-called Reagan doctrine, and associated with it, the Reagan offensive. So that's what we'll be looking at this week. I also have kind of a special assignment for us this week that I think should be fun. And there's an easy quiz attached to this assignment. The quiz is just a response. All I want you to do is just write a response and just react to it. So the 1980s was associated with the emergence of MTV, music television. The 1980s is really the period in which music videos really revolutionizes pop culture music. And so I have actually there's quite a few of them. It might take you 30 or 40 minutes to watch all of these videos, but it's really great music, and they're interesting videos. There are some explicit lyrics, I will say, in some of them, but I chose videos from the MTV era and some of the intermission videos from music television in the 1980s, which they used to have between shows. And the idea is that you go through and you watch it and you sort of experience it in a way like you might experience MTV. I also included some news footage of some of the more controversial items associated with music and society in the 1980s. And I've particularly selected songs that I think convey or express ideas that are associated with issues of gender, of race, of class, of sexuality, and of issues of international relations. So I want you to have fun and watch some music videos, some MTV videos, go through them, watch them all, and then just write a nice solid paragraph response, and explain what your reactions are to it. What does it tell you about the 1980s? So I was hoping that would just be a fun assignment that we could do. When I was very small, I remember MTV, and MTV was ultimate rebellion for young people. The ideas in MTV were things most parents didn't want your kids watching. A lot of the music suggested a lot of, rebellious themes, adult themes, and so forth that a lot of members of society reacted to, and in some cases reacted pretty extreme. There's cases where certain musicians were brought to Capitol Hill. Certain musicians were questioned as to whether or not their music was, if you will, corrupting the minds of youth. Some artists, like Ozzy Osbourne, for example, who I'm sure many of you know, Ozzy Osbourne, were accused of encouraging individuals to commit suicide. And so music in the 1980s was really a really important part of rebellion on the part of the youth, and it was also embroiled in quite a bit of controversy in the 1980s as artists and musicians expressed themselves in more vivid ways, and during a period in which you can really say is like kind of the rise of modern conservatism in the 1980s, many elements of society, reacted to that. So let's have fun this week, and let's watch MTV, and let's react to it, and I'd love to hear what you guys think about the videos and the content of these music videos this week. And we'll take a look back into youth culture in the 1980s. So other than that, just do the response. It's the only quiz grade for you. Your final paper option will be due the end of next week. At the end of next week, we also have our last test. Let's be aware and prepared for that. Let's see, anything else? Oh, factoid, of course. Extra credit factoid. Okay, the extra credit factoid is this. Because my specialization has to do with the Reagan offensive and the Central America in the late 1980s, I'll share this factoid with you. So in the late 1980s, the Reagan administration became embroiled in a scandal, and the scandal became known as the Iran-Contra scandal. And it was, on a scale that was similar to Watergate, albeit it never kind of came directly back to the president. So, Reagan never got fingered directly, nor did his Secretary of State George Shultz or his Vice President George H.W. Bush. None of them got kind of directly fingered as being responsible for or aware of the issues that were associated with the Iran-Contra scandal. But it was a huge scandal that really burst onto the public scene in 86 and 87. And what had happened is the National Security Council, particularly Oliver North, who really headed up on his own a lot of aspects of U.S. counterterrorism at the time, Oliver North had arranged an illegal sale of arms to Iran that were going to be used to exchange hostages. And so Oliver North set up this illegal sale of arms to Iran, and then he embezzled effectively the proceeds from that sale, and he gave those proceeds to the Nicaraguan Contras, which were a rebel group that operated in border areas of Nicaragua, particularly out of Honduras and Costa Rica. Though they were Nicaraguans, they were operating across the sovereign borders of Costa Rica, Nicaragua, and Honduras, particularly. And at the time, this type of funding activity was not legal. The actual sale of those weapons through Israel to Iran, it was through Israel because it was in Israel where the actual transfer occurred. That sale was illegal, and from Congress's standpoint, U.S. Congress, and then the sending of the proceeds was also an illegal usage of those funds, sending those proceeds to the Contras. And so as this scandal unfolds, Oliver North goes up on the stand. There's all kinds of investigations about what had really happened. It becomes clear that U.S. involvement in Central America had involved the United States with a lot of not so nice people, shall we say. The United States, through the CIA, was working directly with arms traffickers, indirectly with narcotics traffickers, and so forth. And so the United States was complicit as well with a number of repressive regimes in the region in its interest to overthrow the Nicaraguan government, which was seen as a leftist, Marxist sort of dictatorship. And in the process of this, the United States became sort of embedded with or entangled with, I should say, particularly groups associated with the National Security Council and the CIA, became entangled with a number of very unsavory individuals that had connections to illegal narcotics smuggling. And as a result of this, when Congress, in 1986, Congress ultimately agreed to fund those Nicaraguan Contras. And as a result of this, the United States ultimately gave almost $1 million in funding to individuals that were known narcotics traffickers. I mean, they weren't known to like Congress at the time. It wasn't Congress didn't actively say, we know we're giving this to narcotic traffickers, but it so happened that there were ultimately elements that were receiving this money that were being used to ship arms to the Contras that ultimately were, to those who were in the field of investigating narcotics trafficking, were known narcotics traffickers ultimately. And that came out in John Kerry's investigation on the matter during the Iran-Contra affair. So the factoid for this week is that the U.S. Congress inadvertently gave upwards of $1 million in finances to narcotics traffickers in Central America in its effort to support the Nicaraguan Contras who sought to overthrow the sovereign government of Nicaragua, led by the so-called Sandinistas. All right, guys, I guess that wasn't shorter. Sorry. Anyway, it's interesting. I'm getting into this stuff. So I hope everybody enjoys the MTV assignment and the other activities for this week. Watch my recorded presentation, and let's have a great week.